When was the last time your buyer was actually in the room when you made a decision about them? Hi, I'm Matt.
And I'm Jasmine. This podcast exists because that question matters more than most marketing teams realize. Let's get into it.
Hi, Jasmine. Hey, how you doing?
Good. May the 4th be with you.
And also with you. I want to start with both of us as readers before we get into the ideas. I came to your post and the thing that stopped me was the LinkedIn message you received after publishing it. Before we get into the debate, let's talk about it.
Sure. So I sent a link to the blog to a senior product leader at a life sciences tools company. He has a science background and is now running product marketing. He said he normally reads messages like mine about a blog and sends a polite no thank you and moves on. This one he read end to end and forwarded to his whole team.
So why did he send this one on then?
He said scientists are by far the hardest people to sell to. His team is currently building new marketing collateral, and they know from experience that one slightly off claim shuts down the opportunity, or at best, slows it markedly. He has scientists on his team whose job it is to be the most critical voice in the room before anything goes out. He described them as poor marketers and PMs or product managers. And he said it with a laugh.
That laugh is interesting because what he is describing is not unusual. It's just usually not spoken. The scientists inside your commercial organization run the same check on your claims that your buyer will run externally. They are the internal proxy. And if that check is happening at the end of the process rather than the beginning, you're already set up wrong.
And what struck me writing the post was that he's on both sides of the table, like you and I both are. He has been the scientist who stopped reading. Now he's the person trying to write something a scientist won't stop reading. That tension is what the blog is really about.
Nice. So what was the story behind the story? What made you write it?
Yeah, a lot of lived experience here. I've been in many MS3 reviews where the claims list is long, technically validated, and still doesn't land in the field. And when we dug into why, the answer was never the quality of the evidence. It was always which claim was leading and whether it was chosen for the buyer or chosen because it survived legal. Those are different selection criteria and they produce very different outcomes.
I couldn't agree more. Before we dive in any deeper, what's an MS3 review for those people that may not be familiar?
Yeah, that stands for milestone 3. It's part of the phase gate process in the new product development process. And that's where the specifications have already been locked in and your verification is completed and you're heading into validation.
Nice, thank you. So in the post, you make a distinction between accumulation logic and falsification logic. Can you explain the difference and why do people default to different ones?
Yeah, because scientist buyers are not applying the same logic to your claims list that you used to build it. Most commercial teams operate on accumulation logic, which is that the evidence stacks up. More proof points make a stronger case. That's accumulation logic. Each additional claim increases the probability that the buyer will be convinced. That's how you build a product deck, how lawyers build briefs, and how most MS3 reviews are structured. However, your scientist buyer is trained in something different. They're trained in falsification logic. This comes from Karl Popper's philosophy of science. A theory can never be proven, only disproven. A single disconfirming case destroys the whole thing, regardless of how many confirming cases came before it. Scientists apply that framework to their own research. They apply it to your application note without thinking about it. The asymmetry is what makes this commercially dangerous. Accumulation logic is symmetrical. 10 good claims plus one weak one still feels like a 10-to-1 in your favor. Falsification logic, on the other hand, is asymmetric, and one weak claim doesn't subtract from the list. It invalidates everything before it. The scientist doesn't think 9 out of 10 not bad. They think, if this one is wrong, what else did they not check? And the damage isn't proportional to how wrong the claim is. A sensitivity figure validated in an R&D buffer system rather than the buyer's actual sample matrix is a technically minor issue. But to a scientist, it signals something much larger about your rigor. Rigor is the whole game.
So if the problem is really one weak claim invalidating all the others, is the fix just to focus on those that you can rigorously validate?
Because more rigorous validation isn't the same as better selection, you can have 10 fully validated claims and still lead with the wrong one. The most impressive one rather than the most defensible one for the specific buyer reading it. Those are rarely the same thing. Selection is a commercial judgment about which claim sits deepest in your target buyer's specialty and is hardest to challenge from their bench experience. No amount of validation work makes that judgment for you. I think there's a good transition here between what we just talked about in my blog and your blog. Your blog makes the case that the buyer disappears before, for example, the claims list is even written, edited out through review cycles before anything reaches a scientist. How does a synthetic customer actually fix that? What does it do that better customer data doesn't?
So the difference is really presence versus archiving. Customer data, whether that's voice of customer studies, interview reports, persona documents, they get filed. They exist, but they're usually stored away on a hard drive, rusting away, or they're filed in a desk drawer and never looked at. And they're not in the room when copy review happens, when the brief is being written, when people are making decisions about which claim should we use. So messaging gets adjusted for what I like to call the gravity of the organization, essentially what's safest, what the organization feels will go through the approval chain. It's not about people deciding to make messaging worse. It's just about everybody in the room not necessarily being laser focused on what the customer is. And also everybody having a slightly different view of what the customer might think. Synthetic customer can be built from real interview transcripts, reports from actual sales recordings, win-loss reporting, all sorts of data that organizations are already capturing. And then once they go into a process, you can build these synthetic customers so that actually you can then query them and ask them their opinion. Now, is that a substitute for voice of customer and doing in-market testing? No, but it allows that buyer presence to be maintained throughout the decision-making process in between those stage gates and in between the points where you would normally go and speak to the customer. Hopefully it allows organizations to then be better informed when they go into those next conversations with customers, reducing rework, reducing the number of edits and the number of times that campaigns miss the mark because the gravity of the organization has pulled it away from what the buyer really needs to hear.
Yeah, so an admission, I've definitely been there when you say personas and PDFs that live in a drawer or on a rusted hard drive. Completely get that. So a synthetic customer is only as good as its inputs. If you built it from win data and conference booth conversations, which are all very positive, it will validate almost anything. So it's the typical sycophancy trap that we hear about.
Well, in some ways, yes. I mean, the grounding has to look at the specific objections, specific questions that people are asking. And then it comes down to testing it as well. If your synthetic customer never says no, then something is wrong with the build. But there is something that's really important to note here, that it's amazing how much these will show you based on the information that's available out there. So we're not just looking at what's a large language model and what it will tell us, but actually once we start adding in voice of customer, adding in top of that information that exists within an organization, what it allows us to do is to start looking at prioritization in a completely different way. And that then allows us to really get under the skin a little bit of the data that we've already captured. So it's not about replacing voice of customer. It's about adding to it and synthesizing it in a way that really gives us a sum that is more than the sum of its parts. Because as humans, we really struggle to bring all of that data together and bring it into something that we can manage in one go. Whereas with the AI, what we can do is we can actually synthesize it to get all of that data into a format that we can then query and ask questions of, and that will respond in a way that is like our customer. So the buyer is not gone because your market got harder. The buyer is gone because your organization made them invisible. Review by review, approval by approval, until what reached them had been edited down to its least interesting form. Before your next review cycle, can anyone in the room name one piece of buyer language from a real customer conversation that should be in the content that you're reviewing? If nobody can, you know that the buyer's already left the room.
And the accumulation logic feels like rigor. What it actually does is give a scientist buyer more places to find the one thing that breaks. The product manager who gets MS3 right is not the one who did the most validation work. It's the one who knew which piece of that work was undeniable to the specific person reading it. That's a commercial judgment. It belongs to you.
Links to both of these posts, one claim you can prove but beats 5 you cannot, and my post, Your Buyer Left the Building, can both be found at striven.com and will be in the show notes. The full conversation that I had with Yuri Belast on his podcast can be found at webdree.net.
We answer every message. We'd love to hear from you. If you're working through a claims hierarchy or an MS3 review right now and something from today is useful or wrong, we'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely. And until next time, Jasmine, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for listening to a splice of life science marketing. We hope you enjoyed the episode.
If this conversation helped you, the single biggest way you can support the show is to subscribe and leave a review on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. We'd really appreciate it, and it makes a huge difference.
You can find out more about us and the topics we discuss at striven.com or on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for listening. We hope to see you next time.